Hey everyone, welcome. No, your eyes don't deceive you. This is pumpkin. It's even a pumpkin stem cut in half so we could share it. So this stuff's been sitting in my freezer and we're now rapidly approaching the season where there's going to be even more pumpkin for the wormies. I'm already starting to see the ads on TV from the coffee shops and stuff advertising their pumpkin flavored this and that. So I think it's time to start doing away with my little supply, my secret stash of pumpkin that I've got in the freezer. The ones that I've got on my hit list today are these two bins. They're African night crawlers, pretty new bins. They're only 22 days of age. The last time we came in here 10 days ago, they got a not that big of a feeding. They got some stuff that probably went pretty quick, cantaloupe, and I think it was combined with corn, which will probably remain as leftovers for some time. The stuff is slow to eat. But I got a feeling the pumpkin's going to go pretty quick, so let's get a glove on and we can get to feeding these systems. So as you can see, everything's already out here on the bench, ready to go. But you might have noticed this in the background earlier. I just wanted to bring notice to it really quick as well. Something we mentioned in the last check-in, because we had noticed some flying insects occupying these systems. It seemed to me like it was time to restore use of the mosquito dunks, the BTI bacteria solution. So I opted for putting the little donut into a sock and tying it off, so that I've got a little bit of a tea bag there rather than just dropping the mosquito dunk right into the water. This way I don't get the little particle matter flying around in there, and I feel like I've got nice clean water I could put straight into my pump bottle and use it straight out of the bucket. So that's going to be incorporated into today's feeding too, getting the mosquito dunks back in use, at least in my newer systems like these, where I have seen a little bit of insect activity, and I want to try to nip that situation in the bud as early as possible. Now's the time to start. One thing I did do here, maybe it was yesterday, as recently as yesterday, maybe the day before, I did come in here, since most of my new systems get protected with plastic coverings to prevent loss of moisture to evaporation, and since these don't have that type of protection, I came in here yesterday, and just because I had my water bottle going already anyway and it was in hand, I figured I would just come into these systems, dampen them a little bit, dampen the top covering paper too. And I didn't even probe down into the material to see if it was even necessary. One thing we did notice last time we came in here was, even though they were covered only with paper, things did seem to be quite damp and comfortable. So I just took it on faith that if I put water in here, even though I didn't check to see if it even needed it, I took it on faith that it wouldn't create a big muddy mess. I didn't put that much either. I mean, I kind of sprayed the whole top surface, then I restored the top covering newspaper, and then I sprayed that down and dampened it. So I don't think I've created any sort of a mess, and I think what we've got here is very similar to what we observed last time too, which was, you know, nice dampness going all the way down. In fact, maybe even a little bit more damp at the very bottom. I guess that kind of makes sense. Moisture's gonna drop to the bottom if it's got nothing to soak into. Maybe that's what happened when I came in here with the squirt bottle, kind of liberally dousing the system for a moment. So I'm glad that everything's looking pretty comfortable from a worm perspective, at least in terms of moisture. I'm seeing bits of the corn, which I think might have been part of the original build of the bin, because I think the last feeding included corn. It did, but it wasn't those little discs that you saw rolling around over here. They were actually larger chunks of corn cob. So just in terms of, you know, being able to see which bits of corn are older and younger, the little tiny fragments, I believe, do go back to the original build of the bin. Oh, there, it took me a while to find one. I thought I'd have one within immediate reach. Let me get my clean hand a little bit dirty. It's just always interesting to see how they hollow out the corn cob so quickly. And they do the same with the, alright, so now we're going to get right down into the feeding area. Like, I was going to go for one of these corn cobs here. It's interesting because in another of my systems where I've got a fairly new corn cob like this, and I think it also was in the bin for perhaps no more than 10 or 12 days, there was a lot more worm activity on it, and I think in that other bin, the worms had actually nibbled out the inside of the corn cob already. Not yet here. I mean, it's not to say there's no worms on it, but it was much more obvious in the other system. In these, though, it does seem like they're working out the middle portion of the cob, which seems to be a much softer piece of material that they always go for right from the start. Then gradually work the rest of the material down too. Here's another one. I think it was only these two pieces. Here we've got a pretty good sized wormy kind of latched onto the thing, nibbling away on it. Let's not bother them too much. They might not appreciate the bright light. They might skedaddle anyway. But why snap that piece of corn in half? We already snapped the first one in half and saw that no progress had been made on the inside of it, so I wouldn't expect anything different in the other one. I am definitely stacking stuff pretty high on both sides of the crevice I'm opening up here, because I would like to be pretty generous with bedding today. I had the shredder out earlier today. I made a whole bunch of bedding, and then my bedding that I make actually uses dry shredded paper and cardboard like this, combined with leaves and moisture and everything and it sits for a few days to become really savory for the worms when I use it. In this case, we're just going to be using about half of this, totally dry, totally sterile paper. In fact, you know what? I'm grabbing this bin's portion right off the bat, and we're going to start with that. That's a good bit of dry material. Good thing I was in here with the squirt bottle yesterday or the day before to moisten all the surrounding material. But before all that surrounding material has a chance to be affected by this dry stuff going in, I've been supplementing the dry stuff that I put into a lot of my bins lately, just to make sure it doesn't end up sucking all the moisture out of the neighboring materials. And I understand that, you know, dry, boring bedding like that, just paper and cardboard, hasn't had a time to really prime for worm activity. It's probably not that appealing to the wormies. So if I drop in some of my worm chow, which was the first powdered material I dropped in, as well as some of this grit that I piled in afterwards, that's just pulverized eggshell, I think I'm suddenly changing the appeal of the material in a hurry. And then we can continue to try to make it even more appealing for the wormies to come visit with something that might not be so sterile and boring as paper and cardboard. Some leaves, a little bit closer to what the worms are accustomed to growing up and living in, which we can once again try to increase the appeal of with a little bit more of my worm chow. Let's not forget to get all these leftovers back in here. I knew that these would be the only leftovers we'd see, because the other stuff that was placed in here for the worms besides these corn cobs was some melon, which I knew would be gone in no time. Okay, so time to bring in their yummy feast. So let's just use number 1 bin, the one that we're feeding here now, as the one to receive the base piece of the stem. The other one will get the top of it. Pretty much an equal piece of wood, if you want to think of it that way, once all the vegetable matter has been nibbled away. And this stuff, once it starts to thaw, this pumpkin stuff is it's like a sponge. It holds so much moisture within itself, especially when it's been frozen and then given a chance to thaw. You know, let's bring one of these back, because this thing's got a whole bunch of material on it, probably the equivalent of a good 2 or 3 of these chunks. So this way I think we're providing a good, fair, even split of the pumpkin across both bins. And let's see, I'm just reaching over here to what was covering things previously. We had some old cardboard bits, and then we had this old coffee filter serving as our feeding zone indicator, but guess what? It's being promoted. As of today, this is no longer our top covering. It's now part of the bedding going in with the food, which I'm going to try to bring the level up even more so that we could use a minimal amount of stuff from the surrounding piles we created to cover up with at the end. I just wanted to have a little bit more bedding sprinkled down into which I could drop all this coffee. And it's not going to be only coffee, so I've been Mr. Generous with the worm chow lately, and it seems like if I keep at this pace, I'm going to have to make another batch pretty soon. But I've got a feeling they really enjoy that. And heck, if we're in here already, it's almost becoming a match set when I add worm chow, I very often also go ahead and sprinkle in some grit too. All right. Yeah, 22-day-old bin, not surprising that it's full of all kinds of large chunks of this and that. The only thing I'm usually concerned about in these newer systems is their tendency to lose a lot of their moisture, since, you know, this material here, this stuff is all just paper scraps and little bits of leaves mixed in and this and that. I do worry about systems like this potentially losing their moisture very abruptly, so I do take a peek in here once in a while just to make sure things are okay, since we have opted to cover only with paper here. And if we do find that it becomes a little bit onerous to always have to come back in here to make sure things are not drying out, then we can always upgrade to plastic, although usually I treat removing of all the plastic as the upgrade. This I like because of all the airflow and ventilation, so whatever. If we come back here in another 7 to 10 days again like we did this time, I don't think we'll have any reason to worry. But if it's going to be a longer period than that, I might just pop my head and give it a little spray of water if it needs it. All right, on to bin number 2. In most of my systems, I've been sort of pairing up the bins, either because they've got the same worm, maybe the same launch date, whatever the reason may be. Been trying to team up my systems, and I like that point of reference where if something's happening in this system, I would sort of expect the same thing to be happening in the other system because it's the same type of worm and the same quantity deployed into a very similar kind of environment. So if something's doing something weird and that same weird thing's not happening in both bins, then I mean, at least you can be rest assured that you've got redundancy, if nothing else. But to me, it's like kind of a control to let you help with the troubleshooting and, you know, comparing things to one another. Good amount of moisture here. Maybe I want a little bit more generous in this one with the spray yesterday. A little bit more dampness down here, but not much difference. Not much difference at all. Okay, here too we had fed those cantaloupes and corn cobs down the middle. So I'm sure we're going to find a similar batch of leftover. Maybe we'll snap one of the corn cobs in half just for consistency's sake. How does that sound? Oh, is this one of them? I would have thought it was bigger. Maybe I already snapped it in half. It's kind of weird to like see the erosion of the material around its core, but the core still being there. That is the part that they seem to like to nibble out right in the beginning. That's what I'm kind of curious of right off the bat. I'm seeing some sort of mold growing here. All kinds of weird green color. Okay, interesting. Something to take note of, which I did not notice in the other system. I see a lot of it here too. I'm just wondering, is there some sort of maybe green? I see a lot of it on the paper still. I'm wondering if it's just ink. Some sort of pigment just flaking off some of that paper that was nearby. I usually trust that the paper I'm using is using some sort of a soy-based ink that's safe for composting. I believe that's the general understanding in the composting world when it comes to the printing that you see on paper. It's a good thing I added water yesterday because it does seem like things in here are a bit drier than what we noticed. Look at this. Maybe that green is mold. I gotta start remembering to try to tie certain observations together. It's something similar to what I saw in a couple of my other bins where some mold started growing, and then in the spots where I had observed good quantities of this stuff, I also observed a good bit of dryness, because it seems like the mold has a knack for pulling moisture out of nearby materials. And if that's going on here, we might have to get the big spray bottle out and compensate. So either way, whether or not the system even would have needed moisture today, this moisture would have been getting administered anyway, because this is that BTI solution in the squirt bottle, and it's going to become a kind of a regular thing, I suppose, into most of my systems to make sure I don't have little outbreaks of insects in my worm bins. And it really is only the newest of my systems where I've seen any, so I'm going right for those as my primary targets. so let's see. How did we do this before? We tried to make the bedding that we placed in here really interesting for them by sprinkling in all kinds of yummy worm chow and grit. Oh, we almost forgot all this stuff that came out of my shredder earlier. Ooh, quite a bit of stuff in here. Stuff that the worms might not be terribly interested in, but if we start piling in some of their old foods that we found along the way, and maybe some of this slightly seasoned bedding material that's flanking it, that might help. But what I think is going to help the most is the moisture, so let's make sure we supplement. Hopefully the moisture we added into the other system was enough to offset the dryness of this paper and leaves. Like I said, I'm going to be stopping back in here, I think, just to make sure I haven't accidentally sent these systems down the path of becoming too dry and too hostile for the worms. And, you know, when we cover up, we'll probably look around the system a little bit more, too, to see if possibly adding moisture using my big spray bottle, high flow. Sucker just sprays and sprays and sprays. Before you know it, you've probably emptied a gallon of liquid. And I don't want to put a gallon of liquid in here, but I'm just saying that thing really sprays quickly. So, and I also want to take into consideration all the moisture coming out of these chunks of food here too, because these are going to add a lot of dampness too, if you ask me. So let's what was it? I think we were going to just try to dress up this food a little bit more with a little bit more bedding around it, right? Is that the way we did it? Something along those lines. Felt like we just kept coming up with new and new reasons to put more and more worm chow and grit in. That's what it was. The coffee. Coffee always ends up being my excuse for going just one more portion on the worm chow. So I like for the coffee to be sort of spread out. I like for it to be mixed with surrounding materials. I don't want to come back into the bin and find little lumps of uneaten coffee, and I think I actually saw some of that before. I found a little lump of it. So I think that's really what I'm attempting to prevent. So we'll grab my actual big spray bottle if we find that adding moisture around the edges might help this system. If it's dry out there too, if there's like little blooms of mold. It almost seems to me like that mold was almost focused on only those corn cobs. I saw it nowhere else. Maybe something came in with those pieces of corn cob and is hopefully going to remain on only the corn cob. So we brought up a good bit of moisture with the stuff that's down near the bottom. Things look pretty nice down here. I don't think there's any reason for concern in terms of the general moisture content of that stuff over there. So I'm not going to sweat adding any further moisture. I'm going to trust that we're in good shape here, but I'm going to bake in a little bit of insurance just to make sure I don't wait another 10-12 days, who knows how long, before the next time we come in here, only to find out we've allowed it to dry off. I'll be peeking my head back in here probably in the next few days just to make sure that these coverings are adequate, that they're protecting the system from drying out, and, you know, make sure we're giving the wormies a nice comfortable space to live. So yeah, pumpkin in September. How do you like that? And pretty soon we're just going to have more and more. So I got to get rid of my supply, and I got quite a bit out there. So you'll be seeing a little bit more pumpkin feeding coming up in my future feedings. But for now, we're done with this feeding today. 22-day-old, 2 African night crawler systems, doing quite nicely if you ask me. And I think with this food that we just gave them, pumpkin, I got a feeling this stuff ain't gonna last. Luckily, we were pretty generous with the bedding, and they could just nibble away on that stuff, so we probably could come back in here another 15-20 days and they'd still be fine. But I've got a feeling we're gonna try to go to a slightly tighter, more frequent feeding interval and try to, you know, power more stuff through these systems, really see what they can handle. So, all right, everyone, that's it for today's video. I'm gonna take care of getting stuff cleaned up and put away, but I'll do that after I turn the camera off. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.